Yeah, hello everyone. In previous lecture, we have discussed about one-to-one relationship mapping, right? So we have implemented unidirectional one-to-one relationship mapping between employee and passport. So employee only is associated with the passport. Employee only relation is associated with passport. So we have implemented unidirectional mapping. So why I am calling it as a unidirectional mapping? So passport cannot access employee information as of now. So if you try to fetch the passport details, if you write separate API to fetch the passport details, it will always give passport details only. So along with the passport details, if you fetch employee information, then passport also will be associated with employee. So this is called bidirectional. So as of now we have implemented employee only can access passport details, but in reverse way passport cannot access employee details. So before implementing bidirectional mapping, I just want to explain you. We have implemented unidirectional mapping, right? So but here we are ignoring Hibernate lazy initializer. So here I have a question. Is it really, or do we really need this JSON ignore properties lazy initializer? Do we really need to ignore? Question here. Answer is no. So while some people may have doubt while implementing one-to-one mapping, I need to declare JSON ignore property annotation as well to disable the Hibernate lazy initializer exception, right? So it's not like that. Some people may by heart the code. So if I want to perform one-to-one unidirectional mapping, I just need to declare one-to-one annotation, and then I have to declare at the rate JSON property. It's not like that, guys. Why I have declared this at the rate JSON property? Why I have declared at the rate JSON ignore property as Hibernate lazy initializer? In previous lecture, if you can see, I have explained you in previous lecture why I have declared this, right? Why I have declared? Because while fetching, so let me show you. Let me disable this in lazy loading operation. So I just started a server. You can see I just disabled that one. So now I just send the request. If you send the request, we got the exception, right? Lazy initializer exception. If you open the console, we got Hibernate lazy initializer because there is no transaction available while sending response back to entity. That time inside the entity there is a get passport method is being called. That time there is no transaction. Because of that we are getting Hibernate lazy issue. So then to skip that issue, I have declared it as a at the rate JSON ignore property. So now if I enable this, what will happen? So now let me send the response. Let me send the request. You can see I got the successful response, but in real time this is not the best approach. Why? Because we are just skipping the issue, but in real time environment, actually what is the reason, the issue which is occurred? Because we are returning employee entity as a response back to the client. We are returning employee entity as a response back to the client, and similarly here also we are getting request as part of employee entity directly. So in real time environment we should not use entities to get the request data, and we should not use entities to send response back to the client, because we have to use entities only to perform database operation in business logic. Inside the business logic only we have to use to perform database operations. all the entities, not only employee entity, which are all the entities we have in your project, those entities we have to use it for only to perform database operations. After performing database operations, so the moment control back to the controller, then we should not use the entities at all. Why? Because entities will always try to connect with the database table, right? So the moment you declared your entity as a at the rate entity, it will always associated with your database table. So while returning the response back, do we really need to connect with that our entity need to map with the database table? No. While getting the request from the client, that time do we really need our entity to map to the database table? No. So because of that, we should not use entities to get the request data, and we should not use entities to send response back to the client. So in real time, what we have to do, we have to create separate employee DTO object. We have to create separate employee DTO object, and DTO in the sense data transfer object. The DTO will get the data, and the data is being set to your employee entity. So we should not directly use entities in controllers to get the request. Even if you get the request, but you will get the data, but that in real time environment, that is not good at all, because it will always have issues like if you use entities here, it will always try to your employee, and whenever you are sending request to uh, from the client to server, that time whenever database operations are performing in controller also, this entity always try to map your entity to database table. So that is not correct way of implementing it. So what we can do, we have to use DTO classes. We should not use entities to get the request. We should not use entities to send the response. So how we can avoid? So, and also we no need to ignore this JSON property also. So we should not ignore this JSON property also. Some people may think while implementing one-to-one annotation, one-to-one relationship mapping, I need to specify this one also. Answer is no. We should not. We do not need to specify in one-to-one relationship mapping. At the rate JSON ignore properties, we do not need to specify. So because of some lazy initialization exception, that's the reason I have ignored it, simply skipping the issue. So why? Because we are using entities as a sending response back to the client. So whenever you're trying to send the response back to the client, our entity always talk to the database table. So that is not correct. When our entity has to connect to talk to the database only while performing insert or update database operations, right? So whenever insert or update delete operation, that time only we have to use entities, and our entities will connect with the database table. But while sending response back to the client, that time our entities no need to connect with database table. So that's the reason we should not use entities as part of while getting the data and while sending response back to the client. So what is the alternate solution? So we have to create DTO object. So let me create package called DTO. So inside the DTO, we have to create employee DTO. That's it. So what employee detail should contain? So employee detail should contain what are all the properties inside the employee entity? Same thing. So just double click on here. You just need to copy all the properties. Here cursor is there, right? Here in this cursor, just double click on the cursor. Control C and go to your employee DTO, and again here double click and paste it. That's it. So same properties should have our employee detail also, but only thing is that this is not the entity, so we should not specify. These annotations are not needed. Control Shift O. to organize the imports, so to remove the imports as well. So now here, now this is a normal DTO class, right? This is a normal DTO class. This class is not belongs to entity. Similarly, inside this employee DTO, this passport is entity, right? So we should not declare, we should not use entities here. So again, for passport also we have to create separate DTO, new class passport DTO, finish. So passport DTO will have the properties which is having passport entity, same properties. Can copy the properties and go to passport DTO and double click on the cursor and then paste it. So here also same, it should not have annotation. So now employee DTO and passport DTO both are ready, both are data transfer object. Why we are calling data transfer object? We are sending request from the client, request in the sense, so if you want to create the employee, let's say uh, uh, if you try to create the employee, so we have to send this request to the client, right? So we are sending this request to JSON request to the our server. So that time we have to use DTO, data transfer object. We are transferring data from client to server, nothing but DTO, data transfer object. So here now I have created DTOs. Now instead of returning employee DTO, go to our service IMPL. So currently our service IMPL is returning entity. So we should not send response. We should not send client. We should not send response back to the client as a entity. We should always send DTOs only. So how we can, now in that case what we have to do, this method always return entity only. So the returned entity we have to convert into DTO. We have to convert entity to DTO. How we can convert entity to DTO? Let me put null here, paste it here. So here em employee entity, right? So this is employee entity, right? So this method will return employee entity, and this method we are returning currently. So now instead of that, what we will do, uh, copy paste issue, let me control V, yeah. So we have to convert this entity to DTO. So how we can convert entity to DTO? Either manually we have to create the employee DTO object and then we can extract the data, and we need to set this data to employee DTO. Instead of that, so we have a feature called, so if you want to convert employee DTO to employee entity to DTO, we have to write code manually, like employee DTO is equal to employee DTO, and then we have to set all the data from entity to DTO. So we have to write the code. So instead of writing the code, there is a dependency called model mapper maven repository. Just type model mapper dependency. You just need to type model mapper maven dependency. So go to maven repository and take latest version of dependency, model mapper dependency. So model mapper dependency is used to convert entities to DTO. Not only any POJO class objects, we can convert from entities to DTO. So this dependency we need to add it into pom.xml. So I just added dependency, so it will download automatically in background. So whenever you are adding dependency in pom.xml, it is always recommended to better update your project. Right click on the project and maven and select update project and force update, click OK. Otherwise this dependency will not work properly. Whenever you are, not only this dependency, whenever there is a modification in pom.xml, manually whenever you are adding dependency, that time you always better to update the project, maven project. That's it. So now dependency is added. Now we can convert our entity to DTO class. How we can convert? So by creating, there is a class called model mapper. Model mapper is equal to new model mapper. That's it. So now this model mapper will have a method called map. So this map method, what it will do, it will convert left hand side. First argument, it will have two arguments. Different set of map methods are there, so I am taking two argument method. So here this should be in employee model, sorry, model mapper dot map method. What it will do, it will convert any object to another object, one object to another object. So how we can convert one object to another object, in the sense same, it should be same kind of object, guys. It should be same similar kind of object. So here what we are trying to do, we have to convert employee entity to DTO. So first argument should be your employee entity and second argument should be employee DTO. Employee DTO dot class you have to pass. That's it. So what is the meaning of that here? So we are converting employee entity to employee DTO. So finally this method will return, this statement will return employee DTO. That's it. So map model mapper dot map to convert entity to DTO. So whenever you are converting entities to DTO, so this always, this statement will always will return employee DTO. So I will just return employee DTO. That's it. So now currently, earlier we are returning employee entity, right? Instead of entity, now we have to return DTO. So let me change the definition of find employee method. That's it. Control Shift to O, and then go to your service implementation class and DTO. Just change it. Control A, Control Shift F to organize the code. Okay. So now here, after getting response from the database, we are getting entity. We are converting entity to DTO. So we are returning the DTO here. So now there is exception in controller. Why? So earlier we are returning entity. Now instead of entity, we have to return employee DTO. Control Shift to O. So our response entity also should return employee DTO. Control A, Control Shift F. That's it. So now earlier, instead of earlier we are sending employee entity, right? So during, while returning employee entity as a response, we are getting some issues like lazy initializer, and also uh, employee entity is trying to connect with whenever you are sending request, whenever you are getting response back, that time our entity always try to connect with our database table. But here, while returning response, entity no need to connect with database table, right? That's the reason we should always return in real time. We should not return entity object. We should always return DTO class object or any your customized objects. Okay. So now let me send the request. So in your employee entity, so this I don't want to do now. This I don't want to specify without doing this. Why? Because now I am not using entities. While sending while returning response back, I am not using entities. So entity, when this issue came, when this lazy initializer issue came, when it is trying to send response back to the, when entity is trying to send response back to the clients, that time there is no session available to get the passport details. That time we are getting the issue. So because of that, we should not use entities as a response. So we should always use model objects or DTO objects as a response. Okay. So now in employee, I earlier we are getting issue. That's the reason I have given. Now I don't want to give this. Let me start the server and check the response. Now I am trying to send the request from the REST line. Now this is not needed. Let me check our server is started successfully or not. Our server started successfully. So now if you send the request, method not allowed. Yes, why? Because find employee method. What is the type of HTTP request method for find employee? Get request method. Then send the request. Internal server error. Why? So let me check. Clear the console and go to your business logic. What we are trying to do here, we are converting employee entity to employee DTO. Employee DTO, we are returning it here, and then in our yeah. So why? Because now this exception we got. Let me send the request again. See, still we are getting exception. Why? Because in our DTO class object, if you see the DTO which you have created, still we have passport. See entity inside the DTO, I have declared it still passport. So in DTO, we should use DTO only. We should not use entity. Now again we got the exception because it is trying to call get passport method and get passport method returning entity. So again entity is trying to connect with the database to fetch the passport information. That time we got the exception because there is no session available. So now what we have to do here also, this is DTO, right? Here we should not use entity, we have to use passport DTO. We have created, right, passport DTO. Just change your passport DTO. That's it. Control yes, control shift to O. Okay, that's it. To organize now in DTO, the child object also we have to use DTO only. So now it will not now this DTO will not try to connect with the database table whenever get passport method is being called, right? So clear the console. So now send the request. See, we got the successful response even without specifying JSON ignore properties, Hibernate lazy initializer. This is we are specifying because we are using entities to send response back to the client in REST controller. So in real-time environment or in any companies, whenever you are working with real projects, you should not, what is the conclusion here? You should not use entities to get the request. This I will change later. So here we should not use entities to get the request data, and also we should not use entities to send response back to the client. We always have to use DTOs. We should not use entities in controller. Only we have to use it in business logic. Always entities should use while performing database operations. After once database operation performed successfully, in results will come, right? That results we should always send as a DTO only. We should not send entities as a response, and we should not use entities as a request object. Okay, so here also I will change you in next lecture. Okay, so in this class you learned. So while implementing one-to-one annotation, do we really need to specify this? No, we no need to specify this at all. Some people may have by heart the code. Okay, one-to-one mapping in the sense I have to specify these two. So initially why I have written to to make you understand each and every concept. You should not by heart the code. You should know what is the purpose I have written this, and you should know what is the purpose we are specifying each annotation as well as each statement. So earlier we are using entities as a response back to send to the client. Now what I am trying to do, I am not using entities to send as a response. I am using DTOs to avoid to connect with Hibernate database table. We should not use entities to send response back to the client. Okay, it is very good concept, guys. This we know at all, no need to specify this. So while implementing one-to-one annotation, one-to-one association mapping, we just need to use at the rate one-to-one annotation. That is enough. If you specify at the rate one-to-one annotation, you are successfully implemented one-to-one relationship with employee and your passport. We no need to specify at the rate ignore JSON ignore properties. That is based on your requirement. That time I am using entities as a sending response. That's the reason, to avoid the issue, I have given at the rate JSON ignore properties. Now I am using DTOs. So in that case, such cases, we should no need to use at the rate JSON ignore properties. I already explained in previous lecture why I have added at the rate lazy initializer. You can check previous videos. Okay, so in next lecture I will explain another new concept. Okay guys, thank you so much. We'll connect with you tomorrow. In this lecture you have learned new concept to convert how to convert entities to DTO, and also you got to know it is not necessary to specify at the rate JSON ignore properties while implementing one-to-one association mapping. Okay, so you have to, based on your requirement, you have to write the logic accordingly. Okay guys, here you have learned two concepts: how to convert entity to DTO, and what is the purpose of at the rate ignore JSON properties. Okay, so you have to learn concept in depth, guys. Okay, thank you so much. We'll meet you in next lecture.